This is automating mobile app deployment with Jamf Now. Session ID is DEP008 for the feedback sessions again. So automating mobile app deployment with Jamf Now, DEP008. And so we'll go ahead and get started as I'll run through here. A couple things. I did run long in my session yesterday in the vendor demo. Anybody at the Jamf vendor demo? So you guys watched me get thrown out? So the thing I didn't do at the end, I've learned from my mistake and do like the most important thing. So if you like just see one thing and then doze off for the rest of the 50 minutes, we'll get this out of the way. This is our Jamf Now app, so everything that I'm going to be talking about. Yesterday we did about a 10,000 foot overview. Today I'll go through and get a little bit more detailed as it applies to the FileMaker platform. But I did want people to understand that we do have a Jamf Now app. Try Jamf Now, that's the purpose of it. So it is on the iOS App Store, purposes of getting through and understanding. As I go through for folks new to mobile MDM or mobile device management, it's better experience than sort of talked about. So try the app, play with it, you'll quickly see what's going on. So try Jamf Now on the App Store and on the iOS App Store. Since it's my first FileMaker DevCon, I wanted to share a quick selfie. That's me at One Infinite Loop over in Cupertino. So I'm a frequent visitor over to the Apple headquarters. Somehow I think it was shot from either bottom or top. This perspective is wrong because I'm actually much taller than that. So as you shoot upwards on there. So that's me traveling. I do a fair amount of traveling. Here's what we're going to do today. So quick session objective. It was a question that came up last year in one of our sessions for our Jamf folks. They wanted somebody asked for a question for MDM for dummies. And I just wanted to get that out of the way. It's not MDM for dummies and what we're going to do today, or mobile device management for dummies. It's MDM for everybody. Just because you've never been familiar with a topic doesn't make you a dummy. It just means you've never experienced that before. So I think that's a better way to approach it rather than saying, hey, this is something that requires a lot of thought to it, and that's what we want to get into. We also want to get familiar with the Apple deployment programs, so folks getting into that and understanding how Jamf Now streamlines the mobile experience. So I want to highlight that and stop for a second. How many folks are developing using the iOS SDK? FileMaker iOS SDK, a couple of them. How many are deploying solutions using FileMaker Go and maybe server or local solutions? Okay, good amount of folks here. I'm prepared to talk about both, and I'll go on this. This will focus more on the simplified solution for that. But I think through everything that we've talked about and everything, especially at the keynote, I think everybody understands how important mobile is. As we sit here in 2017, I love that graph that they showed that showed about 5 billion people. I think it was like 5 billion people and like 5 billion mobile devices. So literally there's a mobile device in the hands of every single person on Earth. So I think that's pretty on the nose of everything that we need to do, that you guys are the forefront of creating single-purpose, great apps, very quick apps for mobile devices, and how to get them to the end users. Anybody here an end user that's actually just developing for their company? Couple of them out there. Something for everybody, and we'll get to that today. I'm actually just going to hold a lot of the questions. That's one of the things that probably took me over yesterday. So I'll hold a lot of the questions at the end. So we'll go through the agenda, get to about, I think, the 15 mark, and then I'll just open that up for questions. Who I am an Apple evangelist. My name is Mike Lim. I am an Apple evangelist for Jamf. That's a funny and fancy-sounding title for the guy that handles the Apple retail relationships for Jamf. So my job is to go to basically every Apple store around the world. We cover 400 of my team and I. Demo Jamf products, work with the Apple business teams. I was actually at the European headquarters for Apple in Cork, Ireland, talking with their team. So I get the pleasure and the blessing to be able to go over and explain all of these things. And that's what I get to do. That's Apple's first evangelist. We've got Steve and Guy Kawasaki. Guy's always smiling, so apparently he knows what he's doing. If you follow his LinkedIn, he's just surfing. So I don't know what he does now, but that's a good job. If I could follow that, I want to be Guy Kawasaki when I grow up. So why I get to present to you guys today, I'm not a developer. I know enough to be dangerous. I've done a lot of studying of the iOS SDK and a lot of work with the Apple teams who are big proponents of the FileMaker solution. I'm actually a certified public accountant. Well, I like to call myself a reformed certified public accountant. I actually like data and analytics, but I much like talking to people, and I love technology. So I guess that's my purpose here, to spread the good word of Apple and Jamf and what you guys can do. And then tell you it's not really that hard. I was a guy who didn't know how to do that, really just loved Apple devices and Apple equipment and understanding how these get to their end users. And now I'm a guy who knows how to do that, and that's what I want to pass along today. So here's our agenda. We'll talk about who Jamf is, quick overview, but I do want to get to the meat and potatoes of it, which is a live demo. We're going to go through an overview of the Apple deployment programs, and then we're going to demo Jamf Now with a simple FileMaker Go based server solution on that one. First, here's what it's not. I think this is really important because there was a great session last year with Rich Carlton on the iOS SDK where we talked about app deployment. He touched upon that, but we'll want to talk about what it's not. It's not a discussion about iOS SDK apps. That being said, I do believe the iOS SDK is the best way to create and deploy FileMaker apps. It's an amazing tool that FileMaker has given you guys to be able to do that. But it's not going to be a discussion particularly about that today. It's not going to be a deep dive technical discussion. As I said, I'm not a developer. I've got technical folks to handle that. It's not going to be a Jamf Pro overview, so we're going to go through with our Jamf Now product. There are folks in the audience that are using Jamf Pro, our other IT-centric users tool, which is very, very powerful, but we won't go into that. And it's not a Mac OS management discussion. I'm going to talk a lot about iOS management using iPads, iPhones, etc. Now, the important thing here is, although I'm not going to talk about that, and that's not what the session here is about today, it doesn't mean that we're not prepared to talk about that. In fact, I'd talk about all of these. We have folks here on the Jamf team willing to talk to that. If you do need to talk about any of these topics in particular, stop by the Jamf booth, catch me between sessions, ask me around as I'm taking laps around the lazy river. I'd talk your ear off on that one. Anything, any place you can catch me, I will talk about any and all of these. Let's go back one. First, let's establish who Jamf is. Jamf is we started Jamf in 2003 primarily as a Mac imaging solution, and that's because there wasn't an iOS platform back then. So we started in 2003 with the sole purpose of managing Macs easier, just making them. There wasn't even a thing like a Mac administrator back then, and we just wanted to make it easier for people at schools and businesses using Macs to use them better and get them out into the environment without all the hassle. We are, should be gotten out of the way, but we are a Apple first, Apple only development company. So we only develop for the Apple platform. It's really, really hard to, I think, get an understanding of every single platform, Apple, Microsoft, Google. In fact, I don't know that you can do it to the extent that we do it. So we focus on that every day, every hour of every week. As you know, Apple, the one thing that Apple will do every year is release a new operating system, a new iOS, a new Mac OS operating system. And you've got to keep track of everything on that. It's an extremely difficult job, but one that we are very passionate about, such that we can just claim day zero support for any feature that Apple's going to put out there. So Apple only, Apple first. We believe it's the right platform. So hopefully if you're using the Apple platform, you can find some good friends at Jamf. The one thing that I will point out there is our mission statement is helping organizations succeed with Apple. It's pretty on the nose. It's pretty on point. There's not a lot of fluff to it, so when I get up every day, I think about our mission statement. If I'm doing that, I'm already doing my job. The one thing I did notice when I put this shirt on today, that it does say FileMaker Inc., an Apple Inc. subsidiary, so if you just extend that, I just pretty much extended helping organizations succeed with FileMaker is pretty much in my job description as well, so that's what I'm doing here today. A little bit about our reach for a Midwestern nice company, little Midwestern nice company based out in Minneapolis, Minnesota. We've got tremendous reach, 9,000 organizations using Jamf. Ones that I'm particularly proud of, 4,000 schools around the globe. That's a big number. 4,000 schools around the globe and 19 of the top 25 most valuable brands. I just heard a story, an internal story about, speaking about schools. We had, in my neck of the woods down in California, the Alhambra School District, we did about 6,000 Macs in 13 days. So we sent a team there to basically spin them up, get them ready for the new school year so they were up and ready to go and successful in using Apple in their environment. So if you don't know, haven't heard of us before, chances are one of the companies that you are familiar with is using Jamf to manage their Apple device population. I literally just Googled, I think, iPad frustration, and I found that. So I don't know who you're developing for, but if any of your users, and you see that, if you go to any of your folks that are using Apple devices and you're putting out iOS SDK apps or FileMaker Go apps or using your iPads like that, or their iPads like that, they're using them wrong. So I don't discount the ability to feel like that, though, because that is the whole purpose of mobile device management. Mobile device management is to basically preserve that Apple experience, guide them along this path, so you maintain a consistent user experience in using the devices and your solution. As it applies to you guys, I think the most important part here is this. You guys are in the business of making really, really cool, purpose-built solutions really fast. If you can't get those to any of the users, the end users doing that, then the solution just lives on its own little island, and that's not the purpose here. So deployment is a big deal, right? You can't just create these devices and then miss the deployment bridge of getting them actually out to the end users. Then, from the other standpoint, if you're actually getting them to the end users and their experience in using that solution, maybe they're out in a field services tech, gathering invoices or taking timesheets, if that's not a great solution that they know on the iOS or on an iOS device, they're just going to be frustrated with it. So we aim to basically take that frustration out of it by using a simple platform that lets you automate this entire process. It just reminds me, so to give a concrete example of this and what mobile device management is, I was working with a concert management company that developed an app based in Northern California. So at the time that I talked to them earlier this year, they had about 200 iPads. 200 iPads, and what they did is they did merchandise management, facilities management, all kinds of things related to venues of concerts all across the US. If anyone's been to like Bottle Rock and Napa, all of these kind of things over there, these are folks using iOS devices to enable that experience. Well, when I caught the founder, one of the co-founders, the way that they were doing it is taking them, taking every iPad, taking it out of the box, imaging them, doing what they needed to do, and then shipping them out. So when I caught him, he was ordering 50, actually he just went to his local Apple store, bought 50 Apple devices, because that's the way he knew how, and basically just went back to his office, started unboxing all of them, going through the setup steps, dropping down his app, setting restrictions, setting up an Apple ID on all of those devices, and going through again and again and again. That took him about 30 minutes per device, and if you multiply 30 devices, or 30 minutes times 50 devices, that was a whole week of this man's effort just spent in doing that. And furthermore, once he got them shipped out to the environment, or the users as they were using them, he had to ship them over to them, and as they started using them, they started locking themselves out, maybe putting in their own Apple ID, using them in ways he hasn't been intended to, and then he was fielding support calls from the folks that he was working with. How many folks actually sort of handle IT support for the folks that they are working with? How many folks like handling IT support? That was a lot of hands that went up and went down. That one guy really likes Apple. Let's talk to him. Maybe he knows something we don't. How many people get paid for Apple for the IT support that they provide? Maybe that's why he really likes it. Okay, let's figure out that guy's secret. So totally off topic there. What that gentleman does now, I'll go back. Sorry, one more slide too fast. What that gentleman does now is he essentially orders an iPad, pre-configures the way that he wants it to look, drop ships it to the location. The staff there picks it up, takes it out of the shrink wrap, goes through the setup steps themselves, and it image itself, it's probably the wrong word, but it basically configures itself into the tool that they need to use. So think about that process, and now he is entirely out of that equation, and they're scaling up to 300 iPads, 350 iPads, extending that solution over and over and again. He's a much happier guy because of that. So a quick note on what mobile device management is. I did want to cover this just a little bit. Actually, that went way too fast. So here's what mobile device management is, for those of you who weren't in the session yesterday, about a 30-second overview. Mobile device management is based on the concept of configuration profiles. It's a configuration profile that contains things like a setting for email, your Wi-Fi networks, apps which should be deployed to the device, all kinds of things. It's a conduit that gets applied to the device much like a recipe. So if you think about making an apple pie, you have flour, sugar, butter, apples, all kinds of good stuff, wrap that in a pastry shell, pop it in the oven, you've got yourself an apple pie. If you wanted to make 50 apple pies and make them consistently good as that first, then you probably should have a recipe. Similar to that concept of that gentleman up in Northern California. If he wanted to make one iPad, now in this situation, configuration profile is a recipe. If you wanted to make an iPad that had a single use and at use only, so it was pleasurable and easy to use, you probably should have a recipe. So to configure that over and over again. So let me give you the example of anybody walking into an Apple store. If you've walked into an Apple store lately or ever and purchased something, they basically take a device off their hip, scan that out, and they transact the purchase there. They don't have to do a lot of thought about what to do, how that device is set up. And frankly, they can also have a lot of tools on there and a lot of apps on there that let them, say, clock in or check inventory stock or solve some technical problems on that. Each one of those devices is configured exactly the same in every single Apple store around the world. And that's all through the use of configuration profiles. It can also do a couple things as we see on here: setup, managing, protecting your Apple devices. So configuration profiles, management, inventory, protection, and encryption. Here's how it works. It's pretty easy. So it's not all that complicated. It's based on the APNS, or Apple Push Notification System. Think of when you get off a plane, if you throw something into airplane mode, if you come off of that plane when you land and throw your phone back out of airplane mode, everything comes flooding down. ESPN sports scores, iMessages, Facebook notifications, etc. That push notification is the APNS. And the way that it works is this: the Jamf server is connected to all your devices through the APNS, and that's what connects them to your Jamf server. Here, there is an always-on connection, so you can keep pushing those, and it's a live connection, so you can make changes on the fly and register inventory data as you need. So you can push things like commands, apps, and profiles, and that's MDM. So there's a lot of acronyms in here. I actually took the liberty of looking up MDM as an acronym, and I think I came up with, the site I came up with had like mechanized demode and meat, which I don't know what that is, and it's also like mechanized death machine, all of which is not Jamf, but I'd be wondering to see what those actually were. Let's get into what the device enrollment program here. Anybody familiar with the Apple device deployment programs? Cool. The reason why I'll go over here is I don't think they're actually, I don't think more people are aware of them, and they actually need to. They're actually free programs made by Apple to make this whole process easier. My analogy here is like a house. A lot of people start these projects with their customers, and they start just buying. People get really excited about them. They buy Apple devices, and they start building this project. Well, without things like the Apple deployment programs, you're basically building the house on a swamp. So you're building like a guest house onto the house, and eventually that thing's going to just sort of tumble down into the ground. Now, the Apple deployment programs are basically a foundation to build something like the device management on top of, and they integrate seamlessly with Jamf. The Apple deployment program, DEP, or acronym being here is DEP, is essentially that concept of that concert management company that I just talked about. It's no-touch enrollment. Essentially, you can define what a iPad or an Apple device looks like, predefine that in your server, and then drop ship that to any location. They can open that up, shrink wrap out of the box, and it'll configure itself in the setup steps that most people opening up an Apple device are familiar with, and it'll just do that automatically. So it'll do things on Apple's website, it references it as no-touch IT. So things like automatic provisioning, enrolling in MDM, deploying apps and configuring settings all automatically. That's the ultimate of it, because it's taking you essentially out of the IT process, or at least that whole setup process. So that gentleman's 30-minute process is now essentially 0 minutes, because he's shipping it to someone else and it's doing the setup process itself. So you'll hear me say this multiple times as I go through, but if you haven't and are not aware of these things, go through the process of getting them set up, and it'll make your process a whole lot easier. Because a lot of this is abstract, it's probably helpful to just show you a little bit about what this looks like. That's the standard hello screen on an iPad. The Apple deployment program essentially works like this. Setup screen, open box iPad, choosing a Wi-Fi network, because anybody using an iOS device should know as you're playing with them that every Apple device has to hit the Apple activation server. And what it's going to do, and it connects to that, essentially while it's up there in the cloud someplace hitting the Apple activation server, it's also going to hit the device enrollment program, or DEP registry, which is simply a big database which says, here's all of the Apple devices in the world, here's the company that owns them. It's going to point to your MDM server, point right back down to the device, and come to that screen. So it will say Jamf software will automatically configure your iPad, or insert name here will configure your iPad. Point to note out of that for folks who haven't seen it is that step can't be skipped, can't be bypassed, essentially can't go past that in any way. So that is extremely powerful. Among the many reasons to enroll in the device enrollment program iPad when you're deploying apps in this type of environment, that's one of them, because it enables deeper functions and can't be bypassed by the end user. Now let's talk about the volume purchase program, or VPP. This, I think, is more relevant to the folks, although the first one is a really good program to have for the type of things that you guys are doing here and developing for customers. Who's in the Apple Developer Program here? Good number of people? Okay. So this covers both sides of the fence. The problem that I see here, a lot of things that I'm hearing as I go forth in DevCon this week is hearing about app deployment, getting these things out to the end user. And Apple created this program called the Volume Purchase Program to address these problems, to address things like using Apple IDs and maybe the method that they shouldn't be used. Enrolling a bunch of devices, creating an Apple device. Back when I saw it, I've seen cases where folks have started an Apple deployment program and then had to get apps into them, and they purchased or they signed in every device under the same Apple ID. Hundreds of, I think the most an Apple SE has ever told me was in an Apple that signed in under one Apple ID was 652. And that's just a nasty bit of work if you actually have 652 devices that are enrolled on the same Apple ID. Everyone was getting the same iMessages, photos would pop up, it was a nasty mess. Here, the volume purchase program is essentially, I like to use the Lord of the Rings analogy, is essentially one Apple ID to rule them all. So essentially, if you wanted to, you just purchase all of your apps or deploy all of your apps under, I don't know, IT purchasing at acme.com. They house them up in that volume purchase. They're purchased there like an inventory, like a lending library, and then you deploy them out to where you need be. Now, the important thing there is that you maintain an inventory of those. So they can be deployed to users or devices. Organizations can retain the ownership, and sort of defines your whole Apple ID strategy. I think of schools as this being very, very relevant because schools have kids that are under the age of 13. If you're under the age of 13, Apple says you actually can't create an Apple ID. So how do you get folks with Apple to get the apps and the tools that they need to do their job without having an Apple ID? You can actually just push them directly in something called device-based VPP directly to the device. And that's really, really powerful because it just enables getting a solution to the end user faster, which I think everyone here is all about. Last one is I can't stress that one enough. If you haven't never heard of that, about the Apple Volume Purchase Program, learn about it from the developer side, then learn about it from the end user side and get that. It's just the smoothest way to develop that conduit between them. It is the key to a successful app distribution. Here is something, I think I stole this directly from Rich Carlton's slide last year, and so I'll talk about them even though I said I wasn't going to talk about the iOS SDK. I do have to talk about this because this is really relevant for you guys out there. So there's three ways to develop, to distribute apps under the VPP, the Volume Purchase Program. One is the Apple Enterprise Developer Program, and that is used in one single organization where you're developing just for that organization, developing an in-house app. Just pushing that to them using that developer program. And it's not publicly available. The second is the one that by far is the one that I think that is going to be the most valuable bit of information for folks here. It's the B2B VPP program. That's a lot of letters. I wish it would roll off the tongue a little bit better. But essentially, as I say there, it's for consultants developing for customers. Easiest way to think about it is this. You develop an app, and then you put that in a non-public app store. So you push that up to Apple's non-public app store. It sits there and waits for the customer to come get it. You designate the customer's email, and only they can see that when they use a mobile device management program to pull that down and deploy. So nobody else will ever see that app, even though technically it is in Apple's app store. It's a bit more voodoo than that, but that's pretty much all you guys need to know. If you did need to, if you don't, by the way, that is the best way to develop and distribute iOS SDK apps is through the B2B Volume Purchase Program. The last one, and we talked about this, I think, with a few folks here today. This was stressed last year. There's also the public app store, which I'm not saying there isn't FileMaker iOS SDK apps on the public app store. It's just not recommended by FileMaker. And many of you out there could probably tell me why exactly. From what I understand, there's sync issues, there is updating issues, all kinds of things. You don't know who's actually getting your app, all kinds of things. But while you can do it, it doesn't mean you actually should do it. In fact, highly recommended by FileMaker that you do not do that. The last two, so the first one actually requires Apple approval. I'm sorry, the first one does not require Apple approval, and the last two do. So those have to actually run through the App Store approval process for any of you using iTunes Connect and running through that process. So I think I'm running right on time. I'm going to now do a quick Jamf Now FileMaker demo, and then just show you this live. So here's what I'm going to do. Jamf Now is a FileMaker, is a cloud-based platform, so I'm going to go ahead and log into this. Actually, let's set this up. And this is going to be like a reverse magic trick. In fact, like the worst magician in the entire world. I'm just going to tell you what I'm going to do, and then I'm just going to perform the trick. So here's what I'm going to do, just to tee this up. So this is a little bit about what we did in the vendor session yesterday, and this will give you the concept of what mobile device management and using our Jamf Now product looks like. The first time you log in here, you're going to see your devices. Most of the time when you first start, you're not actually going to see anything because you don't have anything enrolled in there or placed in there for management. Here's where the meat and potatoes of this lies. This is a blueprint or recipe of template that I created for FileMaker DevCon for our presentation this week. And so in here is something really, really simple. We've already got one device enrolled. This recipe for an iPad, for a conference for iPad, is going to have two apps. It's going to have the FileMaker Go 16 app. It's going to have Try Jamf Now. It's going to require a passcode. I'm going to make that 6 digits in length. I don't have an email on there because it's not real relevant. It'll have a Wi-Fi profile. Now, somebody asked me yesterday something I never really thought about. This will enable it to push the password to be able to connect to those two Wi-Fi networks. Now, just because it's those two Wi-Fi networks doesn't actually mean those are the only two Wi-Fi networks that you can connect to. It's just saying that those two will automatically be able to connect without having to get the password associated with them. Here's where the fun lies. Restrictions. While a lot of this is both Mac and iOS based, this is an iOS only type of concern. So you have things in there that you can restrict. So you can disable the camera. While I'm at it, I might as well disable Siri. Let's take out screenshots as well. And even more fun, I'm actually going to just take out the App Store. So I'll take out the App Store so you can't actually access an App Store icon. I also will take out the iTunes Store, iMessage. Well, let's do that too. We'll take out iMessage, iBooks, podcasts, news, essentially make this like the no fun iPad. We're making every restriction that we can on here. And then we're going to go ahead and save that. You guys see that okay? Looks good? Okay. Finally, I am just going to trigger a wall screen layout, home screen and a lock screen layout to that, denoting this as a FileMaker Developer Conference iPad. So all iPads, iPhones, everything looks the same. From Apple's point of view, there is no business iPad. So when folks pick that up, each one looks the same. So having your logo or some other designation on that prevents them from psychologically using that as a consumer level iPad. Kind of handy, so especially if it's non-removable. So that's pretty handy. And that's pretty much it. So I'm going to make that my blueprint. As I mentioned, now for full disclosure, this is intended to be an iPad coming out of the box pretty much as a fresh, steady state iPad. I did do a couple things to it to make this demo just a little bit faster. But for all intents and purposes, it's exactly as it comes from out of the box. So the way that we are going to enroll in this, I think somebody asked me to it, the way that I get them to control and talk through the APNS is through something called Open Enrollment. Open Enrollment is simply going to a custom web page. Here it's Jamf Demo 2. You can put your company name here, .jamfcloud.com. I'm going to put in my password. We'll pop in my name, and we'll hit Start Enrollment. And it's not going to do anything. We'll do it again. Now it'll go through a series of trust authorizations as it links them and exchanges a token, a trust certificate between the Jamf Now server and this iPad. So I'm going to allow a lot of this. Here is that installation of that profile onto the device. So it's being pushed wirelessly from basically the left side of the screen over to the right side of the screen. So we'll hit install, prompting me for a passcode. We'll install the profile. It'll give you a couple more warning screens here. We'll hit install. And again, all of this is being done wirelessly over the air. Go ahead and hit done. It'll kick us back out to the open enrollment screen. And here's where the rubber meets the road. I generally count. Let's try this. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi. We'll see if I get to like 15 Mississippi as it goes into here. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. While I'm waiting for that, all of these things will be taking into effect. Give that a couple more minutes. Your mileage may vary based on this. The reason, the amount of time it takes to do this is based on 2 things, which is basically the functioning of the Apple push notification system and also the speed of the Wi-Fi network, which is where it gets pushed down. Let's make sure I'm actually, oh, there you go. I missed the whole point. So there you go. As soon as I did that, you'll see that it pushed down the wallpaper, and all of these recipes are now taking into effect. So it pushed down the wallpaper, again, non-removable in this case, and now it's pushing down 2 apps. I'll give it a second there. You'll also notice these things are cycling into effect. So it pushed down the 2 apps, and now all kinds of things are disappearing from the screen. So you'll see I took out the App Store, and I took out the iTunes Store. So no Candy Crush, no fun, nobody's getting anything but the apps that I put down on there. Pretty handy. Just as an aside, this is how I set up basically all of my daughters. I have 3 daughters, so I must have done something either really right in a prior life or something really wrong. This is how I set up all of their iPads, and just as a fun little measure, one demo that I always do, see that big blank space there? That's where the camera would be. So the camera's disabled on this device. Sometimes when I do demos and I travel, I just turn off my daughter's iPhone, and I turn off the camera and just see how long it takes for her to call me. And usually it's like 30 minutes until she just calls me and goes, "Where's my phone?" I think it's tremendously funny. She thinks it's somewhat less funny. But if you do that, you'll actually see it's actually pretty funny. You'll see Snapchat, if they're like in the middle of like a cat selfie on Snapchat, it'll just drop out. It'll just say camera disallowed. To me, it's the most hilarious thing in the world. My daughters also have the amazing disadvantage of being the daughter of a dad who's pretty tech savvy, and 2, works for a company that knows how to do all of this stuff. So all of her friends think I can actually control all their iPhones, which I'm not actually telling them I can't, but again, it's pretty funny. So the way that I chose to do the distribution here, you'll see that it's got a FileMaker Go app on there. I chose to do it very simply. In here, I've just got an FMP URL call that calls out to the database. This is provided by my good friends over at iSolutions. And I'm just going to click on that, and that's just one. I mean, this app deployment can mean any number of things. Here, I'm just linking it to a FileMaker database. This is also storing the authentication credentials off in the keychain. And now I've accessed the database, and I'm linked to a FileMaker server solution. So now I'm a member of I've got my email address, mlim@isolutions.fm. So now I'm a member of the iSolutions team. I've heard Chris has great benefits. It's a dream of mine ever to work for Chris, and now I'm already in the system. So now I've got to my projects, and you can navigate that any way that you want. Just to show you, this is a linked solution. Simple media management file where we just tossed a bunch of things in there. And this is cool. Cool. Simple FileMaker database. And now we're linked and able to use that with a minimum amount of friction and effort on our part. Now the fun part of this comes in as long as I'm here, I might as well demo 2 other things. So if we go into this iPad here, just to show you it's connected, I'm going to demo Lost Mode, which is essentially the function of Find My iPhone, but on a business level. It doesn't require an actual Apple ID. So we'll put this iPad has been lost. Please call the number below. Put the phone number, we'll play a sound rather. And that triggered really, really fast. There you go. And then in a second, it's actually going to also play that sound. There you go. So it's triggering that sound so that can be lost. That's lost mode on an iOS device. Again, in the interest of telling stories about my daughter, I also like doing that remotely and just hearing them call me. It's funny, I was actually in Austin like 6 months ago, And the 9-year-old disobeyed her mom, and when she basically just said, she has a certain amount of screen time, and she snuck up into her room and started playing on her iPad. So I basically put, instead of like, this iPad's been lost, I basically put, you're grounded. This lock expires in 10 days. Dad will be home in 3. I love you. Now go read a book. And I just had it ping all the time. It was pretty funny. I laughed. I use all these family-based examples. The team is probably going to tell me, yes, we've been told that this is not based for families, but this is the way that I learned how to use all this stuff. It's a pretty on-the-nose way to do it. Now, here's something actually more applicable to the folks in this audience. So you're sitting here with this FileMaker Go out. The last thing I'll do is this. Here's the DevCon demo. Those are, as most of you know who are developing for iOS and in there, that apps operate in a sandbox type environment. So data lives in that sandbox. So through any concept of security, all of the information in there, if I wanted to, and let's say for some reason I didn't want that iPad or that person to have the data that's contained in that iOS app, and I just want to pull it off, because I could put it in there, I could also pull it back. So let's make sure I can see that. We are going to remove that from the device. And give that a second, and it's gone. So now the iOS, not only is the FileMaker Go app gone, but obviously all of the data and the links to there. As much as we love the devices and I think that they're really important, the data itself and the customer data, everything in there is probably the most important thing. So that is just a measure of data security that we can pull on and off the device. So I think I'm running right on time. And again, I'll bookend it with this. The best way that I could think about, so all of this, as I've gone through and I've done these demos over at Apple stores, and we've worked with Apple teams and met hundreds and thousands of customers across this 2-year span of the program that we've been running. The thing that I've mostly found is a lot of folks are just customers alike, maybe the folks that you're developing for. It's a real abstract concept. So the best way to sort of experience that and get people to do it is the same way I'm doing here. Just give concrete examples of why this might benefit the people that you're developing from. If they have an iPad or a device or an iPhone that's really doing one thing, if you have a HVAC company that's using that is hiring 10 guys in trucks that just needs, those guys need to do one thing with their iPhone and use that FileMaker solution to take pictures of it in a database, push it out to them. They don't have to think about it, worry about their guys doing all sorts of things there. Experience it. It's best experienced rather than telling them what MDM actually is. So try it. It's on the Try Jamf Now on the iOS store. Get you going free for 3 devices, $2 per device per month after that. So if you only have 3 devices, you'll be the happiest kid in Jamftown. So where do you go from here? Jamf Now. So www.jamfnow.com is obviously the website. Has a lot of the same features, demos, things that can get you into that demo feature is available there too. I will also be remiss, as I just talked about, while you can use a lot of this without the Apple deployment programs, it sort of loses a lot of the flavor. So that everything that I did here, well, I didn't really do the DEP, is based on the Apple deployment program. So really look into those. So apple.com/businessvpp/DEP, as well as a general resource page at apple.com/business/resources. I didn't put on here, but what I think is really important too, and I did mention this is my channel, and we've spent a lot of time building this out since 2014. The Apple retail stores all across the world in the US and Canada and Europe are basically, we partner with all of those stores to demo not just the Apple deployment Apple deployment programs, but the Jamf Now solution. So most of those folks in the store are really available. So while my team is only 5 people, we can't be everywhere. We do a lot of coverage. Chances are that most of the folks here work very close or are in close partnership with an Apple business team. If you're not, let me know, and we can certainly get a hold of one of them to help partner with you guys together for a local resource. So with that, I'll just throw it open for questions. Thanks, guys. Yep. 16.02 comes out. Yep. And you took away the button to so how do you handle updates? That's the fun part. So because they're all handled under one Apple ID, device updates are managed by that one Apple ID. So you can just basically set it to automatically app update, And so they'll never get a screen, and they'll never get that screen that says enter in your Apple ID because it's not owned by the individual using that. This gets a little bit more nuanced because you actually can let them use their own Apple ID. Just doesn't mean you don't have to do that.
This is sort of a side thing.
Yeah. Huh. There's definitely, as you know, especially on the iOS section, the Apple mandate is everybody should be on the newest. There is no, while you can do it on the Mac OS and restrict version updates from there is no way to prevent an iOS update on an iOS device. If Apple puts it out there, I mean, it was a lot. I certainly don't discount that some of those times may matter. For the most part, so you're not in a sort of like an Android managing 5 different platforms kind of thing. Apple always says basically be on the last and greatest operating system. On here, if it's re-enrolled into that blueprint, it will. Here's the fun part of that, though, and this is yet another reason for, a lot of times I advocate more, I'm an evangelist for Apple, a lot of times before I'm an advocate for Jamf. That device enrollment program, think about what that does. If that device gets wiped or you send a wipe command to that, it'll go through and basically go over and over again. There's no way you can not make it look like what you want it to. I used the example yesterday, remember Groundhog Day with Bill Murray? It'll just go through that loop over and over and over. So even if someone stole it, it would just continue to look like that because there's no way for it to bypass the Apple activation server. Make sense? There's a lot of different nuances to that in app updates. I think what we all want to try to avoid, though, is just seeing some screen that just blocks the use of that resource, like enter an Apple ID and password, and like we don't know which one's managing that. So that's the volume purchase program at work. Sir? If you want to yell a little bit or a little louder, we won't make people come up to the mic, or I'll repeat it. Here, I basically took a little trick and did that, and I locked it into the keychain, which enables an iCloud. That's a little bit more of that's a little sleight of hand. Here's the better answer for that. You can do it my way. I essentially had to pre-stage that and make sure that was set up into it, like the server credentials. Here's what I've asked the FileMaker folks. It's possible. What FileMaker has to do, there is a concept called in-app configuration. And that means you can define certain variables before you push them out before you push that app out. Currently, you have to support that. The app vendor has to support that so that we can manage that on the back end. Right now, FileMaker does not support that, so I can't push that out. Now, that being said, I've been told, talking with the FileMaker folks this week, watch this space, because that would make life a whole lot easier. So that's actually a good question. Is FileMaker, so for example, I thought it was, but is FileMaker 15 Go still available on the App Store? Like, can you still get that?
For a while.
Okay. See, we're dealing with everything, so we're going to follow Apple's track there. So if it's available on the App Store, you can hold in your inventory all of those file 15, 16, 17, etc. So you can hold different versions of that app as long as it's sitting in the App Store. So if it only works on 15, you can push out 15 and have them use that. It doesn't mean you have to use 16 or 17, and that's actually an interesting thing that, again, I'll point back to the device enrollment program.
If the App Store was to pull the version down, then it would be gone from your situation as well.
Correct. So yes, if we're going to follow Apple and FileMaker's lead. So the question was if basically if the FileMaker 15 app was gone, could I push it out? And the answer is no, because it's no longer anywhere in the system. It's kind of like an operating system. Like Apple will not let you go back to get iOS 9 ever and go get that. So the interesting thing, what I was going to say in talking about a lot of that, so file corruption, a lot of that stuff, I know that happens because there's a lot of interplay here. That's one of the actual cool things about the iOS system and the device enrollment program, because if you had something like that happen, you guys are the experts, but in my mind, you could just essentially send a wipe command to that and then have it reboot and just start. It essentially reboots the iPad remotely and then re-images itself. So maybe you could throw a new database on there, put the sync, reestablish something, and maybe that would actually fix the corruption. Could. Again, there's a lot of use cases in here that I'm not entirely aware of, but that's the one I have in my head. Cool. Other questions? Yes, sir. Oh, so question is offloaded like local files. Okay, so a couple ways for distribution in that. This won't necessarily do that. Are you talking about like a database and project files? So like if you're storing them locally? There's a couple ways I've seen that handled, and they're being pushed to the device. The most inelegant, it's sort of inelegant, but I know it's a pretty common workflow, is just emailing that format over to it, because that's somehow you've got to get those local project files onto the iPad or iPhone or what have you. So you can do that. You can either email them in. I've seen folks take a Dropbox link and then like host a Dropbox, and they point to that and then just start emailing that. And that way you can have local control over that. That's something that everybody else gets. But just to answer the question, just make it clear, there is no way to actually push certain file types over to that. And one file type right now happens to be a FileMaker, like a FileMaker database file. Just something as an overhead view. Mobile device management, the commands that are allowed to control an iPad are defined by Apple. And so for those of you, anybody use configuration or use Profile Manager? Everybody pop into that? Okay, so you've seen like the payload in Profile Manager. That's everything that Apple allows you to do to an iOS device. And there's nothing, if it doesn't exist in there, then Apple doesn't allow you to do that. So a very good example of that is think about remote access. Like that, a lot of people want to service iPads doing remote access and like screen share on an iPad. Doesn't exist. And for all intents and purposes, I'm pretty sure Apple will never ever do something like that. So pushing out like a file, like a specific file type, just doesn't work. Other questions? Got one, Miss way in the back, and I'll repeat that, hopefully. Oh, okay. So the question, as I understand it, is there a minimum technical requirement, like on an iPad 2? Best answer is this. It'll manage it. You can manage it using Jamf, so you can manage an iPad 2 using Jamf. But if there's any features that require an operating system that iPad cannot run, it's not going to be able to do it. So for example, think about lost mode. That requires, I want to say 10.3. So if you can't get to 10.3 on an older iPad, you can't use that function. As graceful as Apple tells you can't do it anymore. That's about as... Apple does that very gracefully. It just tells you can't do it. You can't get to that bridge from here. It'll go through there. It'll install everything that is able to be installed. So, it's not going to tell you buy a new iPad, which is the implicit sort of instruction that Apple's giving you. But it's not, so it won't do something as jarring as that. It just will, like, you try and use that function and it's not there. I think that one, or it might have got answered. I think we are right at 1:50, so I'm running even shorter on time. I will say this, any questions that you do have, especially, as I said, that slide where these are the 4 things that I'm not going to talk about, I'd be happy to talk about any of those things. And that's actually where it gets really cool in terms of the iOS SDK. A lot of folks that I've met are actually Jamf Pro users. So we're prepared to talk. We've got a Jamf Pro booth with all of our good folks, and I think that's a great place to start if you've never seen this before. But if you want to get deeper into it, where I talked to a lady from a school yesterday, we're Jamf Pro. That and the iOS SDK are really powerful. So really excited to be able to talk to you guys today. iOS SDK, really excited what FileMaker's doing with that. Thanks for your time.